May it please the court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, congratulations. We have made it to the end of the presentation. You have heard the cases of both sides. The evidence is in, and now closing remarks, as the judge had indicated, this is an opportunity for me to tell you about my case, but most importantly to prove what I have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. I have an opportunity to go through the evidence that's been admitted. The judge has instructed you about evidence. I'm going to tell you and argue to you what I think is persuasive, or in terms of what you should find, what you should consider, and I'm going to use that to kind of bear my burden and talk about why the state believes and is arguing to you that we have met our burden beyond a reasonable doubt. And then because I have the burden of proof, I get what's called a rebuttal after Attorney Zacher and the defense's argument, and that will be the conclusion of this trial pending your deliberations and instructions. So judge had indicated that this is a reckless homicide case. I wanted to start off with the elements that I have to prove and how we kind of think we get there. The first one is cause. So I have to show to you that Miss Phillips was a substantial cause in the death of Mr. Phillips. So what is the cause of death here? This. Whoops. The 2019 Dodge Ram that Miss Phillips had driven on the night of February 22nd, when she left her driveway that night. And how do we, so now that, in terms of knowing that that is a substantial factor given what we had seen, that is our theory on cause, that the death of Mr. Phillips was caused by that 2019 Dodge Ram. How do we know that? This is a clip from Dr. Reichert's autopsy report. It wasn't known at the time when the investigators got there, when they were on scene, when they started doing things, but this is a snippet of Dr. Reichert's testimony. And I'm using the laser pointer to highlight the third paragraph, and I won't get in, we saw the pictures, we saw the details, but significant injuries, the blunt force injuries of the torso, the blunt force injuries of the extremities, including the upper limbs, left deltoid, etc. You heard evidence about the subdermal hematoma, you heard about our brain bleed, you heard about the 3 to 9 multiple compound cracked ribs. You heard that they were on the left side. You heard Dr. Reichert talk about how he ruled out other causes. And in many ways, Dr. Reichert is getting to his determination and how he's looking at the evidence in the same way we kind of talked about at the very beginning of the case when we were circumstantial evidence, ruling out process of elimination, ruling out causes, getting to a determination of what the cause of death was by excluding all other things that couldn't be the cause of death. Dr. Reichert testified to you that it was a crushing injury on Mr. Phillips, a compression type injury that ultimately caused Mr. Phillips' death. That death could have been caused by a combination of the significant amount of blood in the chest cavity as it compressed Mr. Phillips' lungs and the brain bleed that I had just talked about. So, Dr. Reichert also testified in terms of the things that could cause Mr. Phillips' death, in that it was significant enough that we can start ruling off common household injuries, other things. This isn't, he's found in the snow, not hypothermia. The injuries are too severe. This is not a slip and fall. Mr. Phillips, from a standing position, could not have slipped on some ice and fallen in the position that you later saw him, because the injuries are too severe. They're too significant. The blunt force trauma is too much. Mr. Phillips, in terms of that, and Dr. Reichert had testified that his injuries are consistent, again, with it being crushed by something, a very large, heavy object. Based on what we heard in the rest of the case, there is only one possible, and I will argue further, but only one possible culprit of that particular injuries, and we can rule out a lot of the other things that you might think. The other possibility that Dr. Reichert had testified to as far as what could cause a crushing injury like that, he did say that a fall from a significant height, if someone, in this case Mr. Phillips, were to have landed exclusively on his left side, that could have been similar. The amount of force generated by hitting the, in this case, pavement, could have caused the significant fracturing in the subdermal hematoma. So how do we know it's the truck? And how do we know it was the truck driven by Ms. Phillips? And how do we know that it was the truck driven by Ms. Phillips on February 22nd, 2019? Starting off here, the laser pointer, this is a silhouette of the truck. Where it was when Ms. Phillips brought it home and she testified, or she indicated to investigator Leinfelder that she hadn't moved the truck. It was there. That's how she parked it. All the pictures we saw early on in this case of the position of the truck in the driveway before it was put on the flatbed tow, that's where it was. But most importantly, we know she got there before it started snowing. Lisa Knutson, as part of her duties as deputy medical examiner, told you that she looked up things like ambient weather conditions and the weather conditions leading up to the morning of. It began snowing at about 2:15. It accumulated about 0.15 inches. She observed that it was about 31 degrees Fahrenheit when she arrived at the next day. In terms of the snow, and we see exactly that the outline of the truck, Ms. Phillips, and that's consistent with her statement as well, that when she disengaged the camera, she got home, it was about the 2 range. We saw other evidence relating to the home Wi-Fi when it was accessed. So Ms. Phillips gets to the home later before it snows. And then, based on Deputy Examiner Knutson's report, that is a little bit after. Yep.
I'm sorry, I should have given the warning that there's a body being displayed.
This is the position of Mr. Phillips in the snowbank. I will hurry through this one because it is sensitive. That is the positioning of his body. We know that this is important because we can see the snow that's covering him on the legs, namely there. We can infer from that Mr. Phillips arrived in that location before it started snowing. Go ahead. This is a picture of the side of the house. We see the 2 large windows that Ms. Phillips had let us know is I guess the dining room is somewhere in there, but that was where the light had kind of come out of. But that's the 2 large windows we were talking about. That's the front of the house. Up there, that's the camera on what I've been referring to as the W driveway. I submit this picture to you because if you thought that maybe Mr. Phillips, Dr. Reichert said a significant fall, Attorney Burdick, you have to prove to me the cause here. The state bears that burden, and I do. That is an inhuman jump. There is an inhuman jump. If Mr. Phillips were to somehow be in that tree you see in the top there, or the top of the roof, I won't dwell on this point, but we know that is not, the structures that we saw, what could have caused a significant amount, significant fall, a significant trauma impact type of collision. We have the garage. You saw pictures of the garage. You saw how much snow was on it. You saw how much that snow wasn't disturbed. You saw the icicles on the side of the house, a picture of that. You saw that none of those were broken off. Again, the roof of the house, there's no snow imprints, there's no anything like that. Deep enough that wouldn't have been, if it had snowed 0.15 inches. The snow depth, the displacement of snow, there wasn't that much snow. This isn't a blizzard. You also see that in the area surrounding to the top of this picture, the banks, things like that, there's not an indication that there was any disturbance there, that something came through there. Or anything like that. So that's one cause you can rule out. In terms of the time, though, what if somebody else hit Mr. Phillips? A truck. I can't just say that a truck could have done it and there's a truck. I have to rule out other possible causes in order to get us there so that you're so satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt. Could it have been somebody from the road? No. The positioning of that body, you saw how far into the driveway towards the garage it was in relation to the house. It is too far from that road that it's not like somebody sideswiped him. Someone was traveling down perhaps as Sergeant Valencia had testified to, that intersection with W and M and the blind spots and things like that. It's not like somebody lost control of their vehicle that way. It's not like somebody lost control of their vehicle or was not paying attention. Mr. Phillips is too far up the driveway. We know that other people, some other vehicle, maybe he was standing in the driveway and someone else came into the driveway and hit him with a vehicle or crushed him, ran him over. We know that that is not the case because the motion cameras, they're activated by Ms. Phillips at 11:08 p.m. And that is right after she left. And her testimony and what we heard on what she has submitted to you is that, in terms of her testimony, is that, she left that driveway, he was alive, she didn't know. That was the last time anyone had testified or knowledge we have that Mr. Phillips was alive. She leaves based on her testimony, we know, and the other evidence received. That's about 10:50, 10:55. We know that by the time she sends that text at 10:57, that she is already in the subdivision. That subdivision is already 2 miles down the road. We have a pretty good sense of the time between when she's there and when those cameras are rearmed at 11:08, a few minutes later. So at that point, the cameras are operating. Motion is being detected. If there's going to be somebody comes into the driveway, either driveway, and comes back, we know that the cameras are armed. Ms. Phillips indicated that she gets back to the house around 2, maybe a little bit before. There's evidence submitted. I'll go through the timeline here in a few, but there is evidence submitted regarding that. Now, this is where the other pieces of evidence, again, we're ruling out cause. The snow matters because we know that Ms. Phillips got there before it started snowing. And we know that so she turns off the cameras. That's when they're now disengaged. So the argument I just submitted to you about the motion cameras, that's no longer working as of when Ms. Phillips disengages them. I'll confirm the time as we go through the argument, but just before she gets home. We know, and again, because of the snow on Mr. Phillips, that he was there in the time I had previously argued because, again, the snow is on top of him, and we heard testimony about that. So at that point, we know that the positioning of his body is he's in a spot where he is there before Ms. Phillips gets home and not after, because of the accumulation of snow. We also know that when Ms. Phillips got to the back door, the lights were on, the door was unlocked. So it's a you can rule out the possibility that maybe he went out after the fact. Maybe he had left, he left the house not with the lights on, not with the door locked, in that small window between when the cameras are turned off and when it starts snowing. If he were to come home significantly later, again, we have that window where we can rule out those other causes that, maybe he went out and got dropped off with his friends and one of his friends ran him over, his friends being the people at the bar. We can do that, or some other person comes up the M driveway that is just unknown, because the snow versus the door being unlocked when Miss Phillips gets home. He didn't leave after the fact or come home after the fact. Oh, sorry, before you do that. That's cause. Ruling out other causes, that's where we're at as far as what could have caused Mr. Phillips' death. And it is, in fact, consistent with everything we've heard in terms of the testimony, and it is ruling out those other possibilities. So that's element one. Now let's talk about element two, the other elements. Ms. Phillips' conduct created a risk of death or great bodily harm to Mark Phillips. Ms. Phillips' conduct in this case is the driving of that truck. The risk of death or great bodily harm was unreasonable and substantial. Substantial, focusing on that, is unreasonable and substantial. It's the kind of thing that somebody would know, they were aware. Well, I guess I'll just finish this. Lori Phillips, the last element, was aware of her conduct created the unreasonable and substantial risk of great bodily harm. That's the reckless conduct piece of this. Ms. Phillips has to cause the death of Mr. Phillips by criminally reckless conduct. Recklessness is a state of mind. It's different from an intentional state of mind, but it has to do with her subjective awareness. She doesn't have to know that she caused his death. She has to know that her reckless conduct created an unreasonable and substantial risk. We're talking about a vehicle. We're talking about a truck. We're talking about something that has significant weight and impact. It is common knowledge. It is common understanding that traffic accidents are serious, that a vehicle is not a toy, that driving is a privilege. We all, if you've driven in your life or are aware of that, you know that driving is a responsibility, and it's because of how significant the damage can be, the risk of, again, great bodily harm, death, that kind of thing. We're talking about a vehicle. The unreasonableness, well, I'll get to more on recklessness. And again, part of this is, I'm using this to highlight the common affairs and knowledge. This is a picture of a yellow light. If you drive and you know, in terms of what you can be aware of, we've all been in that situation where you're going somewhere, the light is about ready to, it's green, and then it goes to yellow, and then it goes to red. And you see the yellow light. And in that 1, 2, 3 second window, you have to make a decision as a driver. You have to make a decision as to the speed you're traveling, whether you'll make that light, whether you won't make the light. You have to be aware of other people around you. You have to be aware of what other cars are doing. You have to be aware of if there's some pedestrian in the road. You make all of those determinations in that window, that tiny window. You assess that risk, and you assess, am I going to make it? What are the risks if I don't make it? Will the light turn red? Will I go in the intersection? Will I cause a collision? Will I hurt someone? That is all something that is common knowledge when we talk about being a driver or a vehicle, that is the result of those kinds of decisions, and you have to take them seriously, and you have to make sure that you are assessing that risk appropriately. And as I had indicated, you also have to make determinations, not just of the cars, not just of the time of the light. I'm not arguing that, I mean, you do have to think if you'd get a ticket or not, if you miss the light. But, if there's somebody a pedestrian that you didn't see wants to cross the road, maybe they have the walk sign, maybe they don't. Those are all the things you are aware of when you are getting ready to start a vehicle. Recklessness, drinking and driving. Another situation where it is common understanding that the relationship of alcohol and driving is not a good one. That contributes to the recklessness. Awareness of the risk. I'm arguing to you in terms of that this is a vehicle, that this is the kind of injury or issue that could create substantial harm to somebody. The unreasonable piece we'll get to in a minute. But awareness. Here we have a picture of the truck. We have a picture of the back door. This is a picture of the truck afterwards. We're talking about the truck that was parked not in this direction, but towards the W driveway, which you saw many pictures of. You're aware of that tight space. You have to make a decision on how much distance we have here. You have to avoid the trash can. You have to avoid the snowbank. But you're aware of what you're dealing with in the same way that you are when you go through the yellow light. You have to understand the intersection you're dealing with, and Ms. Phillips did understand. This is her home. She testified about the snow. She knows how it's laid out. She lived there. We saw pictures of the driveway. Further awareness, the headlights in the truck are on. It's illuminating the area. You can see down the driveway. You can see where that snowbank is. You have a good idea of the estimation of the distance, how much space you have to play with. In the situation that Ms. Phillips, the way she had described things with Mr. Phillips in the driveway, the passenger door is open. I'm arguing that you can conclude or think that, that the interior lights are on if the door is open. I'm making that inference. There's the side view mirror. We've heard about talking about that. I'm pointing up there. But you have to know that that side view mirror, that's part of the clearance of your vehicle. Your vehicle, it's a part of the vehicle that you're driving. That has to be taken into consideration. That's another factor when you're weighing the risk of, can I do something? Can I do something? Is it safe to do something? So now we're getting into the unreasonableness part of this. It is not enough for me to submit to you or argue to you just that Ms. Phillips created a substantial risk. It has to be unreasonable. Ms. Phillips is mad. Ms. Phillips tells us what here, this is line 621 through 623. This is Investigator Leinfelder's interview with her, her statement, go ahead and get your stuff out. So he was like getting everything out. And I don't remember what happened. But then again, he got all pissed off again, like he was gonna come get me. So then I was just like, F this. And I was out. I'm gone. That's Ms. Phillips' frame of mind. That's how she described it when she met with Investigator Leinfelder. She met with Investigator Leinfelder, and when we talk about credibility of a witness, their representations, their memory, there's been a lot of pieces in this trial where people and witnesses have talked about, this was 4.5 years ago. This was within 2 hours after police arrive. Or whenever she gets to the home and police station. We're talking about a matter of hours. This is the time when it was most fresh in Ms. Phillips' mind. This is the time when she is remembering and processing the night before. She is emotional. She is grief-stricken. That is fair. But this is her statement. And again, we call that an excited utterance in terms of, when you're not thinking, when you're not processing, when you're just reporting, this is what I understand and this is what I'm saying. Those are her words. And then Ms. Phillips tells us a little bit more. These are lines 535 and 547. So Investigator Leinfelder, at some point he leaves the passenger side around the front of the vehicle. Ms. Phillips, And Ms. Phillips, he was running for me, yeah. I'm surprised he didn't just go through like he could. And then Investigator Leinfelder clarifies, so he gets around the front of the vehicle. He's coming, Ms. Phillips, yeah, to my door. Ms. Phillips, again, in case she made a mistake the first time, and then I was just like, F this, and then I took off. That's the second time she says that. That's how she's describing what had occurred. And here we have, she knows that Mr. Phillips is in front of the truck, or at her door. She knows he is in close proximity to where she is going to drive that vehicle. She has to make those same snap decisions that we talked about, or I argued in terms of the yellow light, the decisions every driver has to make. And she's doing it right then and there, and she's been drinking. So this is the layout of the property. Again, this is not with the snow. This is the aerial photo that we've talked a little bit about. We have the back door. We talked about the clearance of that back door. We talk about the space that we have to play with. We talk about where that truck is. And then there's the snow and the way it's shoveled. The trailer, which is not in this aerial photo, is here because the Phillips were moving. That's the situation where Miss Phillips takes off. And she does it. Now, in terms of judges, we've heard a lot of testimony about what her version of events is. Here, the corroborating evidence is that she was mad. She was upset. She was not upset because Mr. Phillips was going to hurt her. She was mad because of the way Mr. Phillips was treating her. She was mad because Mr. Phillips is jarring, I guess, for lack of it, he's saying mean things to her. He's saying what he did. We heard the testimony on that, and we know she's mad because she takes the cozy, the one that he just insulted her with, and she throws it back at him. You heard a lot of testimony from Ms. Phillips and other witnesses, and we start talking about how do we get to knowledge? How do we get to what somebody understood? You cannot reach into the mind of another person and know for sure what they were thinking. None of us are mind readers. The cozy, her description, the I'm, yelling, I hope the cameras are on. But that Mr. Phillips was coming around. Now at this point, and again, we've heard a lot of evidence about what happened at the dive bar, what happened, previously, and that's a different, that's a similar but different piece to this. At this particular point, she testified that Mr. Phillips, that was the worst she's ever seen him. That was the most emotional she's ever seen him. In that brief window is when it all clicks, and he comes around the truck. But the reason she made that determination is because of the look he gave her. After everything we heard, after what we heard in the dive bar, it was just the look. The eyes, the presentation, just the evil look that he gave her in that 2 to 3 seconds that he came around that truck. That's what caused her to get the F out of there. That's what caused her to hit the gas. And she did that knowing he was there, knowing he was around that truck, knowing how much clearance she had to work with because it's her house. She takes off. This is a picture of the M driveway. This is a picture of one of the cameras. The state bears the burden of every fact. Judge told you that, and it's true. I have to bear the burden of the elements. I have to make sure that that happens. I will tell you right now and argue to you, it is not enough. I cannot prove this case by just saying Miss Phillips' story was not consistent. I can't bear my burden like that. And I can't bear my burden by saying that if Miss Phillips didn't know or didn't have the awareness that she created the risk that she did, that I can, and finds out much later that Mr. Phillips is there, if that's when she discovers the body, either when she comes home or in the morning or, sometime after that fact, that is relevant only to things, in terms of her credibility. It is relevant to the indicators of guilt and the indicia of guilt, the acknowledgement of guilt, because we're getting to what she knew and what she believed and what she understood. The element is not that she knows she killed him. It's that she knows she created the unreasonable and substantial risk. But I will argue, I am offering this though. This is a picture of the driveway. We're looking at what Miss Phillips indicators in terms of how she presented the version of events. This is the driveway. There's that porch there. We can see the snowbank here in the top right. We can see the clearance. Those are not her tracks. These are not her tracks. None of these are her tracks. This is after the scene. But in terms of the man cave, coming around, we can see how much space there is to work with during that event that she described. And we can, in terms of her coming back the other way around, when she came back that night, we can see that Mr. Phillips is poking out of the snowbank, and she indicated that, in terms of how she drove by him, that she didn't see him. And here's the picture here. This is Exhibit 20, I believe. If Miss Phillips had come into the right, gotten onto County Road W, and then goes up the driveway, this is light, granted, but that's Mr. Phillips' body right there. With the white sheet that the ME or Tri-State put on him, Mr. Phillips was wearing dark colors at the time. Mr. Phillips was at night. Previously, that affects visibility. But this is the straight-on shot. And you can see him even with the white on white, and that this, when Miss Phillips would have arrived in the driveway, that this would have been 0.15 inches less snow accumulated on the side of that bank. The ambient light here, she talked about how the dining room light was coming through in terms of her testimony, these big windows on the side. And she has headlights, and we saw her headlights, or not her headlights, we saw Sergeant Valencia headlights, how they would have projected. So Miss Phillips pulls into the driveway, and Miss Phillips avoids the sunglasses, the same sunglasses we saw that have the glare, that have the reflection, that even if it's dark would have refracted the light back at her, these sunglasses. And and we can see the distance between that and Mr. Phillips' body up in the right corner. We can see again how it cuts here, going up to that narrow area between the man cave and the door. The driveway, the angle of the snow, how it was set up. This is not only the clearance on the other side, this is the last one. Okay. I'm turning over to, now that I'm in terms of the cause and the scene, I'm turning over to some of the things we know about the timeline. And speaking of timelines, I'm just going to check how I'm doing on time. Sloopies. This is later Mark and Lori at the dive bar. This is that picture at 8:31 of them coming back. Go ahead. Mr. Phillips re-entering the dive bar. The text. The surveillance camera of them leaving. At 10:04, this is now where we're getting to the end of when they go back home. You saw this video, or in terms of this particular part, you can see Mr. Phillips standing here. You can see Miss Phillips standing here. You can see that she's saying something to him. I would argue that it looks like she's arguing with him. 10:07, this is the text she sent to Miss Klinsky, and that she's deleting this text. She testified to you, and you heard her version that she did that because she didn't want Mr. Phillips to know that she was sending that text. This is the 10:09 when they leave. Ms. Klinsky responds. This is 10:51. He just freaked again. He was at the passenger side of the truck and tried to come at me around the truck, but I took off. I don't even know what to do. He has lost it tonight. He promised me he would never touch me. He lied. That's 10:51. At that point, Ms. Phillips is in the subdivision. More text between her and Hannah. This is the one 10:53. He's out of control. I am done. He can go to Bismarck on his own. His issues big time. Ms. Phillips at 10:55 tells her version of the events regarding what at this point in the timeline seems to be relating to the truck incident. That is very similar factually, especially relating to the earring about what we had heard at the dive bar, which was several hours sooner. At 10:57, this is another one where we can see where Ms. Phillips, her mental state, the frame of mind she was in. I wish you the best, but the best will never be with me. You lost everything tonight because you let your mind get the best of you. I cannot believe you put your hands on me. Good luck in Bismarck. Ms. Phillips indicated that Mr. Phillips' jealousy got the best of him, that he became someone she had never seen before, that she was unsafe, that she needed to prioritize, that this is her safety, that she took out of the driveway because she had to make sure that she was safe. 10:57. This is right after this incident happened. This is when she's in the subdivision. This is when she's looking back to see if Mr. Phillips is chasing her. She said she sent that text. You heard her testimony, but she sent that text because she wanted Mr. Phillips to reflect. She wanted Mr. Phillips, the person who had just acted this way, the person who was delusional, the person who was had become this jealous monster, she wants him to reflect. She's mad. She sent this text facetiously. She sent this text right after the fact because she just left the driveway. Because she just left the driveway after this incident, and just like when she had indicated to Deputy Stoutinger, she had reason to believe that maybe she hit Mr. Phillips. Offered for knowledge. And her emotional state, it's not consistent in terms of the version where she was attacked. This is consistent with Miss Phillips leaving the subdivision, being mad, and now checking. Again, that Mr. Phillips is so jealous that, the second he realizes you're leaving, he's going to come get you, but you're sending him this text. Miss Phillips then looks into the hotels. Go ahead. Miss Phillips arms the cameras at 11:08, and then she begins checking them. And it's worth noting the times on these, but she's now checking for Mr. Phillips. At this point, she knows, you've heard testimony, that those motion detectors are operating, that she's armed them, and she is saying that she's looking for potential people coming and Mr. Phillips going. She's checking to see the scene that she just left. She's live streaming it. And she does it 3 different times that night while she's going through her version of events. This is the Baymont Inn. This picture right here. Miss Phillips indicated that she had booked that room for the wrong night. And Miss Phillips has indicated that, she was going to stay at the hotel. That would have been it, and that's so that she could be safe. She could be safe for Mr. Phillips. Here's the Woodman's parking lot. Miss Phillips indicates that she's sleeping in the truck, that Mark had sent a text to his friends to go out. That's the happy hour text. We heard evidence that text was, I think, the 21st, but my words aren't evidence, so whatever you would remember, heard, experienced. But at this point, Miss Phillips is in the Woodman's parking lot. She's continuing to check the video. She's continuing to check the video because she knows. Go ahead. So. And she knows. Because at this point, Miss Phillips has an opportunity to go to stay with the Klinskys, to go to Winona. She has an opportunity to go with her friend. She has an opportunity to have her friend's stepdad come to her. Miss Phillips has an opportunity to be safe. The hotel didn't work, but Miss Phillips has an opportunity to go somewhere. She has an opportunity to go in the truck, but she doesn't do that. She continues to check the cameras. At this point, motion sensors are still activated. She still has the ability to, she's live streaming. She's looking for, in her words, comings and goings. This is the part where Miss Phillips, I guess, can't have it both ways in terms of her version of events. It's either she's scared, this is the worst experience she's ever had, this doesn't make any sense, I'm so terrified that I am unsafe and I need to focus on my safety, or is it that I needed to get home for a reason, or is it that I wasn't concerned for my safety? Because at this point, this is about the time she goes back. She turns off the cameras. She says that that's not to disturb Mr. Phillips. She indicates that I guess she didn't indicate this, but I'm arguing she's going back to the situation, not the situation, but she's going back to a house alone after turning down potential law enforcement help or thinking that it was a cop in the subdivision. She wasn't looking for help. The neighbor that pulled into the subdivision, she's not looking for help. Any of the time period that happened after that, not going to Onalaska, not taking an opportunity to go with the Klinskys where she would have had people to watch out for her, look over the place, call law enforcement on her behalf if necessary. She's chosen or is indicating that she's going to go back to a residence alone with Mr. Phillips, the same violent Mr. Phillips that we heard about, the same, terrifying Mr. Phillips, the possessive Mr. Phillips, the drunk Mr. Phillips. That's where she's going to go back. She gets back at around 2 a.m. She drives right past where Mr. Phillips' location is. She arms the camera, she goes to bed. You heard her version of events in terms of what she's doing there. And then she gets up, rearms the camera system before law enforcement arrive when a little after she calls 911 at 6:29:37. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Phillips' actions show an acknowledgement and an understanding that she had a real good idea what happened in that driveway. Her behavior, what she did, how she did it, again, acknowledging what had happened, the checking the cameras, the making sure, the nuances in how the system is or isn't armed. The fact that she didn't go to Winona, and we'll hear argument, but she has her version of events. Did you switch the slides?
Oh, I did. So were you not ready?
No, that's fine. But in terms of that, how she comes back, all of that shows that Miss Phillips knows. She has the acknowledgement of what had happened in that driveway. She knows that Mr. Phillips is in front of her. She knows that she took the F off. She knows that she did so because they were having an argument. This was, despite the other evidence, the non-physical part of the argument, and that based on the look, that is, with all of the understanding of how that driveway was set up and everything else, that's when Miss Phillips takes off with Mr. Phillips in close proximity to her. She goes over him with her truck. She causes his death. That is unreasonable, and it is substantial. It is unreasonable because it's not based on her need to flee, as she indicated. It is based on her anger. It is based on her being in the heat of the moment. It is based, and perhaps very probably, based on Mr. Phillips and the way he acted that night, that he mistreated her in some capacity is going to be is not in dispute. That leading up to that moment, again, she's acting in the heat of the moment out of anger, not out of fear, not out of safety being the number one priority. And the reason you know that is because her actions after the fact are so inconsistent with that narrative. I just wanted to touch on this. This is from the autopsy in terms of discussing other things. Did Mark punch the window at the dive bar? It is worth noting that as hard as he had hit the window at the dive bar, that Mr. Phillips did not have damage to his hands. This is the truck. We've heard a lot of evidence. There is no problems in terms of, there isn't denting. The truck's in good situation. The truck did not have damage on either side. Mr. Phillips pushes Ms. Phillips up against that truck, does so with significant force, but there's no indication of the damage of that. Is that the done? Okay. So ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're about at the time where I am at the end of my opening, closing argument, I guess. We have ruled out cause. We've ruled out that there is only one cause, beyond a reasonable doubt, that truck is what hit was what crushed Mr. Phillips, causing his death, that Ms. Phillips drove that truck, that she knew, even though she was emotional, even though she was upset, even though she was mad, what she was doing. She assessed the risk. She understood the situation as far as what was going on and what could have happened. She did it anyway. Maybe she knew she killed him right then and there. Maybe she just thought she hit him, but she knew. She knew right then and there. And everything that happens after that is a narrative that is inconsistent with the evidence that is presented. Thank you.
Thank you.